Hello everybody, welcome to the stream. We are painting fabric. If you have ever taken a look at a reference image that has fabric, or if you've ever been in the bathroom and you see the way that your towel is hanging on the rack and the light's coming in through the window and it looks just really fantastic, but you go to paint it and you can't quite make sense of it. Today's stream is definitely for you. This is a gallery series painting that I am putting together. As you can see on the bottom image there, it is a bunch of fabric folded up and placed into a nice pile. Today I'm going to be tackling this section in here, and I'm going to be talking through the way that I think about painting fabric, the way that I go about it, and some of the key things to think about. Now I did paint, you can't really see it because I've got it a little bit out of the shop, but if I just move my camera here, you can see that we painted this section in yesterday. And today I'm going to be focusing on this blue fabric in here, and then if you'll notice, I actually have a little bit of that blue fabric. Let me just recenter my camera there. I've got a little bit of this blue fabric down along the bottom, and if there's time, I'm also going to be tackling that as well. As always, with everything that we do, we're never painting what we think we're painting. When I'm taking a look at this reference, yes, I can see that it is fabric. However, I'm not painting fabric. When I'm painting, I'm simply thinking about light and shadow. Light is the subject, not the fabric, not the blue fabric. The light is the subject. Why it's important to think that way. When we think in those ways, we're able to break this section down into very manageable big areas. Instead of thinking about every single little piece of nodule of texture that we see in this area, instead I can think about, where am I seeing light? Where does it roll into shadow? Where is there an area that's being blocked by the light, by this lace over here that's creating a cast shadow? Where do I need to have soft edges? Where do I need to have sharp edges? Those are the types of things that I'm thinking while I'm breaking down this fabric. Again, I'm not painting fabric, I'm painting light. Now you'll see on the bottom here, I've got my palette. In the first painting of this, painting my underpainting, I went in and I grabbed a value that was right in the middle here, right in this transition area where light transitions into shadow. You're going to see these really colorful hits of light. That was the light that I pulled out and painted the entire section. I allowed it to contaminate with some of this purple. I allowed it to contaminate with some of this shadow color up here on the top. But I picked out kind of my darkest, most colorful version of the light. Today, what I'm going to go in and I'm going to do is I'm going to take that value range, which is starting right in the very middle, my midtones, and I'm going to push those values out. So I'm going to take my shadows darker, I'm going to take my lights lighter, and I'm going to re-establish this mid-tone color in here to create that transition of where light moves from light over into shadow. Now on my palette, you'll see right here, this one over here is the color, that's a lie, this one right here is the color that I originally painted it. I'm going to move the lights one step lighter, and in the shadows I have this in here, and then I don't know why I have this darker shadow. Yes, I do. This is my darkest shadow, so perhaps this one is actually my light. Because yes, this was what I originally painted at, because I usually only go one step darker in my shadows, one step lighter in my lights. We'll figure it out as we go. It's all good. If you are watching along, let me know where you are watching from. I'm always curious to see how far my channel has reached. It's really great to have everybody here, and let's dive into it. If you have any questions as I'm painting, please, please, please drop it into the chat. Let me know any questions that you might have. I'm here to answer anything that maybe is confusing you. If you've tried to paint fabric before and something, a part of the process tripped you up, let me know in the chat. I would love to talk that through with you. Okay, so I'm going to pick out some of my darker shadows, and I'm just trying to make sure that I grab my brushes that aren't contaminated. I'm just going to wipe it off just to make sure Always want to make sure that I know exactly what's coming off of my brush. Okay, so instead of going super dark right away, I want to actually go in with this value. And I'm using a 50-50. You'll see I've got a little bit of a lid, a jam lid here. And I like to use jam lids to hold my medium. I'm using 50% Alkyd, 50% linseed oil mixed together. I never mix more than 50% of my paint with my medium. I always want to make sure that I've got a good amount of paint in there, just a very small touch of medium. But I do find that I'm using a mixture of Old Holland Oil Paint as well as Winsor Newton. And they're both very highly pigmented paint. Therefore, sometimes they can be quite dense. And so they need a little bit of medium to help them to flow, simply because they have so much pigment in them and they're so chromatic. So I'm going to try to make sure that I'm not knocking around my cameras here. And I'm just thinking about my reference. I've got my reference up here, so if I'm looking up, that's why. So I'm taking a look at where do I have these darker areas, and then I also want to double check I have on my floor here, I've got my printout. This is what I used to transfer my, sorry about the noise, the reference onto my canvas. Sometimes because I transferred this onto my canvas probably a good 2-3 months ago. I don't quite remember where all the lines go, whether they were right where this shadow begins. Is it the transition? Did I mark where the transition ends? What does this mark actually mean on my canvas? So I always go back to my black and white and I can see exactly where my pencil marks were, and that was where we've got our transition right above it, and then this is where it grades right into the darkest shadow. So this is where I need to put this value and just bump it up against here. Now I'm just going to lay it in, and I'm going to follow this line, and then I'm going to work back into it with that transition color and work back into it. And I'm just going to lay this over my entire shadow, and then I'll start to bring anything darker that needs to be darker in there afterwards. I like to pre-mix my paint. Oh, awesome. I'm so glad you were able to check out the painting of the first pass. I love painting first passes. I find that they are really messy and fun. And there's something that I love about just being, not that it's not controlled, but it's just a little bit wilder. And I love that about first passes. So I'm just got a little bit of pigment in there, a little bit of gunk, so I just want to make sure I'm not getting that on my canvas. Now I'm trying to pay attention to where I'm seeing my lines, and then this shadow in here. Now, what happens when we're painting light, when light is the subject? When we observe light, we notice that it does a couple of different things. When you have, let's say, I'm going to pretend my fist is a ball. When we have light coming in from this direction and we've got a ball, this side that's facing the light is going to be in the light. This side facing away from the light is going to be in shadow. That's how it works when we have one sun, when we live in a world with one sun. Now, where this ball, we've got light and we've got shadow. Where if it's sitting on a tabletop, where it blocks the tabletop from that light, we're going to get a cast shadow where it blocks it, right? Simply the same thing as when you're standing on the sidewalk on a very sunny day. If you're facing the sun, the front side of you is going to be lit with light. The back side of you is going to be in shadow because it's facing away from the light. And then your outline is going to be a cast shadow on the sidewalk. Just like with the ball, when we have the light here, where the light wraps around and transitions into shadow, we're going to have a nice soft edge. Where we've got a cast shadow on the tabletop, we're going to have a sharp edge. So same thing with my fabric here. I've got the light coming in from this side in my reference, if you can see in the bottom there. That means the top here is in light, and as we transition underneath here, this area is blocked from the light. So this is going to be a gradient. We're going to have this be nice and soft. However, this lace is casting a shadow and blocking this area of the fabric from the light. So it's casting a shadow. That means these edges here are going to be sharp. So a couple key different things I'm thinking about. Again, I'm not painting fabric, I'm painting light and shadow. All right, so we're gonna get this in everywhere where we need it to go. I'm gonna try to not talk too much today so that I can get more of my painting done. I don't wanna have to go live again tomorrow as well, although I will if I've still got the paint mixed and we don't get where we need to. I promise that I will paint this entire painting from start to finish live here on my channel. So if we need to go live another day because I've already got the paint mixed, we are going to do that. Okay, so just double checking what I've got going on here. This shadow is going to bleed into here. Now I don't want to paint this entire shadow because as this shadow transitions up here, we're catching a little bit of the reflected light coming through here, and it's bouncing off of some of the lace up here. So we have this it's kind of almost greenish. And so I want to transition my shadow from this blue, slightly green as we move up here. I already started some of that with my first pass where I allowed this contamination to spill over. And we're just going to reinforce that. So I know that I can go in and I can establish this edge along here, but as we move further up this shadow, I am going to want to mix in a little bit more of that greenish value. As I was setting up this still life, this is something that I put in my studio, and I rearranged the fabric and I rearranged the light until I found something that I was really interested in. One of the things I absolutely loved was the way that this lace casts the shadow down along here. It's a really gorgeous pattern. The way the light slips through some of these holes in the lace and the way that it creates that cast shadow up here was one of the very interesting things that I liked about this setup. So I want to make sure that I'm doing right by that and making sure that that's comes across in my painting, because it's something that I absolutely love about the reference. Now, as I'm coming up to this edge, I'm thinking about the fact that this fabric is raised up on top of this one, right? So it's raised slightly off of this fabric down in here. I want to keep this edge slightly soft. We'll see if I'm going to sharpen it up later, but right now I want to have options, so I'm going to leave this a little bit soft. You can see that I've blown this. You can see, actually, that's good. You can see it really clearly on the camera there, that this edge here is quite a bit further. That pink is quite a bit further than where my transfer lines are. So I can push back a little bit into it, but I don't want to eliminate that entirely. I want to have a little bit of a soft edge on this edge here. And then when it comes to the final painting, then I can decide what I want to do from there. When it comes to some of those final passes that I'm going to do. If you weren't able to catch any of the rest of my lives, they're all up on my channel. I've got them in a playlist called Painting Fabric. You can go ahead and check them out after today's live. Catch up any ones that you haven't. All right, I'm just trying to be careful because I want to make sure I get all of these holes into place, because cast shadows always explain some further information about our objects. This cast shadow and all of these holes represents and explains the holes that are in this lace. So it's really important that we're paying attention to that. Now these are quite delicate. I'm just going to grab my mull stick. I need something to rest my hand on, otherwise I'm going to start getting paint on my hand and not realize. Okay, so there's very thin shadows in between here. So we're just going to establish those, and then this in here is a full shadow. Sometimes with this many lines, it can get a little bit hard to see why did I make this line and what is it there to represent. So go slow with it, you'll figure it out, or you'll realize for next time that I didn't need all those lines and it ended up making it way too confusing for me. So I want to probably not go much further with this color. This color is a lot more in this area. And then as we transition kind of right across here, this is where it starts to turn into that green. So we've got a large area of that shadow in here. For right now, the shadow is going to be quite basic, and we'll add just a little bit of information into our shadow, slightly darker anywhere where we need to. And then again, you'll see we'll transition it slightly greener up at the top there. But for the most part, our shadows don't need a bunch of different variations in color or value. It's okay to keep our shadows basic. Like I mentioned before, the whole concept of this is to paint light. Without light, we don't have any information. All of our information happens in the light, and that's where all of the interesting detail, all of the texture, things like that, where we can really show a lot of the nature of the objects or the subjects that we're painting, and shadows can be a lot more forgiving. We can keep them quite a bit more simple without having to get too extravagant with them. Right. So this, where am I? Yes, this can go like this. And then we're just going to paint around these spots. Now this is not the final value of the shadow. There are some areas where we're going to go slightly darker. But this is a good starting point. This is going to take a little while just to go around all these little spots, but that's okay. We'll take our time. The payoff is going to be really fabulous, so I'm okay to wait for it and to work for it. I think one of the best advice, maybe not the best, but some really good advice that I have received in my time of painting is if you take a look at something and you say, oh my goodness, I would never want to paint that, don't paint it. If you look at something and you're like, this is way too complicated, I don't want to even do this, then don't do it. It'll drive you crazy, and you're not going to enjoy the process, and you're not going to be able to have the mental capacity to do what you need to do to get the result that you want. So why force yourself, right? Why make it harder on yourself than it needs to be? Give yourself the permission to say, you know what, this just does not tick in my boxes, so I'm going to choose something else. All right. Whereas I swear sometimes I get into this stuff and I'm like, why did I pick this? But then afterwards I'm like, oh my goodness, I love this. This is amazing. So I do it to myself. Now I am trying to not go too much into my transfer lines. I'm trying to stay right with my transfer lines. I am going to go in and blur this out just a touch. Today, this color in here is not the final value. It actually is, it'll be closer to this light value in here. So that's going to allow me an opportunity to go in and lighten and reestablish any areas that I need to at a later date. I'm not sure that I'm going to do that today. I think I'll probably leave it this kind of mid-tone that's in here right now. I'm just trying to be careful of my basic shapes here. So you can see we've got this rounded lace that's coming in here, and then we've got these circles. All right. We're gonna go in and just, oh, no, you know what? I'm not paying attention. We're not doing that with this color. We're gonna go in with our slightly more green color. So what have we got going on here? Here, this pinches up like this. I have my reference. I always have my reference really close to where I'm painting, so I can always double check. I can always go back and take a look at my reference. So I have my reference just right above where my easel is, so I can just double check constantly. Okay, so I had this green, this brownish green on my palette up here from the shadow that I had right up in here, this cast shadow on the top of that fabric. I always like to double use my shadow values or colors in other areas to really bring in and unify the painting. So I'm going to go in and just mix some of this color right into this blue, and that's how we're going to get some of that green up in this area. That's maybe a little too, that's good. I'm just going to let it blend with the blue, so it's a very gradual transition. You're not seeing a hard line of where we go from green into blue. So we'll just kind of blend this a little bit. And again, we'll bring this up to the top here a little bit. And keep that edge soft. Always thinking about what are the edges doing, what is the light and what is the shadow doing. Do I need a hard edge or do I need a soft edge? Okay, and this comes across quite sharp actually in this area. So we've got a sharp edge here. There we go, comes like that. Now there is quite a bit of a darker shadow right in this pinch point, right between this fabric and this fabric. So I'm going to leave that for my slightly darker value. Just to go in and establish that, just to show that the light really cannot get into that area. It's going to be a pinch point, so you're going to have a much darker value. When you're thinking about painting light as your subject, that's when you start to realize that value is everything. You can paint something with incorrect colors and still have it look like what you need it to if your values are correct. Value is everything, and that just values just how light or how dark something is. All right. Let's get right up into this corner. I am using a filbert brush today. I find filberts are really great for getting nice sharp edges. I find they are very versatile. You can turn them on their side and get really sharp edges. You can turn them the other way like this and get really soft edges. And I like that when you've got a lot of paint loaded onto the brush, it creates really nice sharp lines. So I find a lot more of my detailed work, a lot more of my smaller work, I end up using filberts for them. All right, so I'm just gonna go in and establish the, again, I'll probably have to come back in with some lighter values and reestablish the light in these areas, but we're still just making sure that I have that roadmap. Okay, cool. bit lost in this area as to what we're doing. I think there's some very thin lines that are happening here. Like that. Again, is anybody going to go in and notice if I don't have, you know, an absolute spot on match here? Probably not, but try to get as precise as I can. That's why I put these, that's why I do a transfer, just to help me with that information. Oops, sorry if this is noisy. Just want to double check. Where I put my lines. Now, one of the things that would have really helped me out that I wish I had done is in these areas where the shadow is in these spots, if I had colored them in with my transfer, I would have very easily been able to see what's a shadow, what's a light. And so even from that very first stage of placing in my transfer, I could have set myself up for better success here by really showing where these darker spots of the shadow are, rather than trying to guess later on. So we've got a shadow in here, and then we've got a shadow over here. There's 1, 2, 3, and then that goes 1, 2, 3. Now I don't typically mix paint on my palette very much. I know some artists really love to go in and just kind of have their main colors laid out and then go in and they mix paint as they go. I find I get much more accurate results because colors are tricky and they love to lie to you all the time. I find it much easier to go in with some good color mixing well beforehand. Make sure that you've got your colors and your values set on your palette so that when you get to painting, you don't have to guess. Because when I lay this down, this looks very different than what it does compared to on my palette. And I may be tempted to go, oh, that's way too dark. And so I'm going to go in and I'm going to change it and I'm going to lighten it and I'm going to lighten it. And then all of a sudden I put in all this dark background and this looks way too light. It's not even reading as a shadow anymore. And so it's very, very easy to be tripped up by what we perceive color and value to be based on what's around it. Like I had mentioned yesterday, in painting this fabric in here, it looks very, very purple and even looks purple up in here. But as soon as I start to get some of these other values in here, especially this blue down in here, this is going to look like blue instead of purple. And so context matters. Context is everything. And it's very easy to get confused when you're painting, especially as you're learning, to get confused as to what colors and values you actually need in your painting to make the subject look like what you want it to look like, or to get the light and the shadow correct. Okay, so this edge in here is a cast shadow. Again, I want to make sure that I'm really following my transfer lines here, because I will say this over and over and over again, this outline explains to the viewer what this edge is doing. This cast shadow explains, one, this fabric that it's falling on, but it also explains what the edge of this fabric is doing in really easy ways, because I've got a transfer line to be able to copy that exactly, an easy way to be able to describe form and describe what is happening on an object simply by paying attention to what that cast shadow is doing. Okay, we're going to come in here, and it comes across like this. And this comes like this, and then we've got some thin lines again here that bleed in there. Really paying attention here. Slowing down where I need to. And then this comes like this, and we've got a tiny head of light there. And then that one there. Ooh, my shoulder is feeling it today after 2 days of painting. I can feel my shoulders getting a bit tight. I needed to sit down today because I was feeling quite tired. And so I didn't want to be upstanding, but this is just slightly, my shoulder's just slightly pointing up, which is not the most ideal painting position. And if I weren't recording this and we weren't live, I would adjust the height of my easel. However, because of all my cameras and everything else like that, I need to have my cameras all set up. And that makes that a little bit more difficult. So I'm painting at a slightly funny angle. And I also wanted to be able to paint not only this section, but also the section that's a little bit further down. In order to do that, I needed to kind of have it in a bit of a neutral position, this height of my easel. Typically you want to have your, for ergonomic sake, you want to have your, when you're painting, you want your easel to be like this, so your shoulder can be neutral rather than being raised or being lowered. You want to have your shoulder be neutral, and that's just going to help preserve those muscles a little bit longer and allow you to paint a little bit longer, so you're not getting shoulder problems. Okay. There you go, it's starting to come together there. Double checking my shapes. There we go. If I need to, it's looking a little bit rough, but if I need to, I can come in and reestablish with my light values a little bit later. And then you can see here that I've got some of these colors. I blew them out quite far out into the background. Once I lay in my background and darken that up, I can go ahead and switch that up. So I'm feeling good about that right now. I've got everything kind of set into place for the most part. And so now I'm just going to go in and I'm going to reestablish this color in order to be able to create this gradient. So if you look on my palette, that's just this slightly lighter blue. Add just a touch of medium just to help make sure that it's going to flow nicely. And then all I'm going to do is just come in, and I want to pay attention because this colorful area in here is not actually that large, and I don't want to get into a situation, which I did yesterday, where all of a sudden my gradient, I actually shouldn't leave that on there because that's still drying, but where this area started to get too enlarged and I had to push back into it. So I want to make sure that this transition actually happens kind of right around in this area. And so I want to keep this in a controlled area without it sprawling too far. Now with gradients, I've got a gradient, right? The light is moving from light into shadow over here, and then it's going to bump up against my cast shadow. Really, really important to make sure that that gradient actually goes right up against that cast shadow. Because if I stop right here and you see this little sharp edge right in here, it's going to break the illusion of the fact that this is a gradient, because that gradient is going to go all the way straight up until that cast shadow hits it. So really important to work that gradient right up into that cast shadow, and then I can reestablish that edge if I need to. So now that we've got that into place, I'm just going to manipulate this edge here and soften this out until it breaks down. These values are not that far apart, so you'll see that if I just rub my brush along it, every now and again pick up some paper towel and wipe it just to make sure I'm not getting contamination, you'll see that this breaks down fairly easily. Now I don't need this gradient to be like super soft. I don't need it to be absolutely flawless, because gradients or form shadows where we have light transitioning into shadow explains and helps to decide the texture. On something that is like a marble ball, that transition is going to be very soft, very smooth if the marble is absolutely soft. Now this is like a terry cloth type of a fabric. That means there's lots of little bits of fabric and lots of little bits of that cloth poking through it. That means there's going to be lots of interruptions to that gradient. It's not going to be super smooth. So our transitions where we see light moving from light into shadow, again, is a great way to help us to reinforce the illusion that we're creating of the texture of what the subject is. And in this case, we've got terry cloth. So we're going to make sure that it's not a super smooth gradient, but there's a little bit of variation in it because it explains the texture of the material. Okay, so we're going to move in and actually I just want to make this area fills in kind of over here a little bit like this, and then kind of like that. So there we go. Now we're just going to go in. I'm going to wipe my brush actually before I do that. And to wipe my brush, I just pinch it in there and just pinch it in and then shake my brush like that, and you'll see that lots of paint comes off. And then I just always work it into this paint. If I know that I'm going lighter, so then I just work it in here until there's no contamination. And that's always going to make sure that I have the color that I'm expecting on my brush. So I'm just going to go in and I'm going to paint this everywhere. I'm not going to be painting my brightest highlights at this stage. I want to do that slowly once I have everything in the setup into place. Just like how our transition areas help say something about the texture, so does our value range, so does our lights. And it explains that if we have a very shiny fabric, that highlight is going to be really bright. If we have a fabric like this, it's almost like a terry cloth, it's going to absorb quite a bit of light, and so we're not going to have really bright highlights. We're not going to have that glaring white highlight on material like this. And in order to balance the fact that I've got so many different types of fabric in this setup, I want to make sure that I'm balancing those values all together at the end without accidentally jumping that value range too quickly. So I'm going to do it at the end, save my highlights and any of the lighter areas. You'll see that in the lights, I really only have one value in the lights. Same with this one, I'm just going to have this value in the lights, and then I will come in later and brighten up anything that I need to so that it makes sense in relationship with all the other material in the stack. If you are finding this helpful or you're finding this interesting, I'd love to just hit that like button. It really helps my channel just to grow and to let the old algorithm know that this is a value video and that other people should definitely check it out. So again, I'm going to pay attention here to this sharp edge because this cast shadow, we want it to maintain its shape. And it's very easy to let that flatten out if we're not careful. So as you can see, this color is quite bright, and so I'm going to end up filling in these spots with this bright color eventually. So that's why I wasn't too, like, I'm not super particular. It's bothering me. It's definitely bothering me, the fact that these lines are really messy and kind of out of shape, but I know that it's not going to stay that way. So again, I want to make sure that that cast shadow here remains sharp until it moves into that gradient, and then we're going to allow it to be soft because we want to hold the illusion. If we break that gradient off too soon and we allow a sharp mark in here, it's going to break the illusion of form. Edges are important. Now there's quite a bit more of a leap in value between this and this than there was between this and this. So I think I'm actually going to create an admixture on my palette. The reason I don't want to mix it here just with my brush is that I want to make sure it's a really good in between. If it's too far of a jump, like it's too close to this lighter value, it's going to be really hard to break down on this edge. If it's too close to this transition value, then it's going to be really easy to break down on this edge, but a lot harder on this side. So I just want to double check to make sure, and I can do that much better if I control it by using my palette knife rather than just mixing them together with my brush. So you can see, oh, I'm mixing it. No, can you see that? Here, maybe I'll do it over here. There you go. This is also a way to prevent my colors from getting too muddy. Sometimes if you really start mixing things up on your palette, kind of like, oops, like I did up here, it can get a little bit muddied, and I want to prevent that from happening. So I'm just going to grab a little bit of my lighter value here and just place it right next to it, and a little bit of my darker value and place it on this side, just so I can see all of those in context together. And I can see that it's still leaning a little bit too dark, so I need to add just a little touch more. Actually, I'll just scrape this in here. Need it to be just a little touch lighter. I feel like that's a much better in between value. So if you ever need to check your values, if you're not sure if something's a good mid-tone, just lay them right next to each other on your palette and you can easily be able to see. Okay, what brush was I using? I think we were using this one. Okay, so I'm just gonna go in with this admixture in here, and I'm just going to place it in between here. And again, we don't want this gradient to be perfect. Don't want it to be super ooper duper smooth. We want it to say something about the texture. Still reading quite light, actually. Maybe I should have pushed that a little darker. So just go in with some of this darker value. Just push it back up from this side. I don't want to have too much paint on my brush. So if you're having a hard time making transitions, having a hard time making them soft, just create an admixture. It just means that probably means that your values are too far apart, and so it's having a hard time blending that edge together. And if you need to, just create a little admixture in between, and it'll help make that transition nice and soft. And again, I want to bump up that right up against my cast shadow. I'm actually contaminating my cast shadow here, and I'll go in and I'll reestablish that after, because we always want to make sure that we create that gradient all the way to the end. So just want to blend this back in here where this edge meets that light. Okay. So I'm feeling like I'm liking that. I'm just gonna grab my fan brush, and I actually think that fan brush is dirty. I'm gonna grab a clean fan brush. I'm just gonna stand up for this and just very gently, just barely touching that canvas, just to take out any sharp edges, to help that be nice and soft. So now you can see we've got a really nice transition in here. I do have some sharper edges. It's hard for me because my brain loves to see absolutely smooth gradients, but that's not always what's called for based on the texture of the fabric. So you're not going for perfection. Okay. That's better. And then let me just grab a nice dry brush. You'll see that this one is quite fluffy. It's quite stiff. It's been pretty beat up. It's an old brush, and I'm just gonna go in and just very, very gently. I don't want to be pulling too much paint off of the canvas, but I just want to blend any of these, create just slightly more modulation in some of those areas. There we go. Okay, cool. So that is, I'm gonna actually just go over this area as well too, just because I don't want to have any hard lines in that shadow, just very, very gently. I don't want to disrupt any of the edges that I've created there, but you'll see that we already have this 3D form starting to show. You can see where the light is wrapping around that and where we're starting to round out the form. Now my gradient got a little bit too high up in here. I need to kind of curve it down a little bit, just because this area in here got a little bit too high. So we're always paying attention to the shape of our gradients, because our gradients are going to tell us the nature of our object. Now there was a little bit of a, kind of comes up a little bit here and then down a little bit on this side. If an object is super wide, it's going to have a really nice wide gradient. If an object is very narrow and the light very quickly transitions from light into shadow, then we're going to have a very narrow gradient. Okay. So I'm just going to step back, if I can. I'm just going to reestablish this, kind of comes just kind of like that. There we go. Perfect. And then just blend that out anywhere where I see some harder edges. Cool. Okay. Love it. All right, now I'm going to, actually we have a little bit of a shadow. Just going to grab my mall stick here. We've got a little bit of a shadow where the light just, where this edge just transitions away from the light. So I want to get that in there. Again, a soft edge, because this is going to be where the fabric is tucking back in just slightly. And so it is going to be a form shadow. It's where we're going to go from light into shadow. And light, wherever we transition based on the form of an object, is going to be a softer edge than a cast shadow, which is going to be razor sharp. Okay, so I'm just going to make sure that I have this, just like on this side here, I wanted to make sure I had this cast shadow because it's actually happening on the fabric. I'm also going to put in this slightly darker shadow, which is happening just up at the top there. I want to be careful because I feel like this is quite dark in value, but we'll see what it looks like. I don't want to go too dark too fast. You can always push something darker, but sometimes it's harder to lighten it up after. You'll see this is just going to really set that in, that space. Any questions? Anybody have any questions or comments or confusions or frustrations they've experienced when painting fabric? Let me know on either the live here today or the replay afterwards. I'd love to chat. All right, this kind of really narrows up and starts to become the shadow for the lace, so I don't want to go into that too much. I do want to make sure that I am softening out this edge just a little bit. Again, I can move this shadow in quite a bit further. You can see that this is actually where the edge of that fabric is. This is where I've placed in that shadow. I may want to move it in, nudge it in just a little bit further, but not too much. I want to make sure that I still allow this to be a soft edge. So I'm just going to bring it in a little bit closer, but not all the way to that edge just yet. Because lace, right, this is a very zoomed up version of, this is a larger than life version of this fabric. You can see some more detail, meaning we can see some of the areas where the edge of fabric, right, it kind of has that soft, almost like where you need to take a scissor and cut over it. That's kind of what we're seeing a little bit. There's some softer edges here in this. Okay, cool. So you can already see, even just establishing that edge here, you can see how this starts to lift off of the canvas. And because we have that shadow under there, it's starting to set back underneath, and we're starting to see that 3D nature. We're starting to see that pop that's happening. And part of that is just simply edge and value. Edge and value. Edge and value. That is what everything is just edge and value. Color absolutely can make a difference, but is it essential? No, which is why grayscale paintings still can look very, they can still look very detailed, and they can still have 3D form, because color is not as important as you think it is. Okay, I'm going to go in with some of this slightly darker shadows in here, and I just want to establish we've got some really darker shadows happening in here, where again we have those pinch points somewhere where the light really cannot get to that area, and this, you'll see, it's really starting to reinforce how far back in this fabric goes, and it just allows you to see even more of the nature of this fabric. So essentially we've created a very 3D form here from 1, 2, 3, 4 values. 4 values, 4 colors. I've had a distinction between these are my absolute shadow values, this is my transition value, and this is my light value. So 4 values, and we've already started to establish that 3D effect. Once you understand the elements of it, it can actually be quite simple. It's just a matter of doing the thing. It's just a matter of putting the values where they belong and the colors where they belong, and knowing that you're going to get the result that you're looking for. Okay, so this darker shadow comes along here and underneath like that. Now again, I don't want to leave this as a sharp edge because this is soft fabric. That means my reflections, even my darkened reflections, are not going to have sharp edges. Darkened reflections that have sharp edges are often reflecting something that is very sharp in of itself. And it's also super reflective. So if this was satin or silk and underneath it was a very sharp line, potentially you could have sharp lines in your reflections, but because this is fabric reflecting off of fabric, we're not going to have any hard edges in our reflections. Again, another way to build that illusion of our objects. We're always trying to reinforce what the viewer is looking at. That's what makes paintings impactful. And it says, oh my goodness, look at that stack of fabric. That's how I know it's a stack of fabric. And I can understand something about the nature of that fabric based on the lines and the edges that the artist chose. So we're just going to leave that like that. We do have a slightly sharper edge here where that cast shadow wraps around. So that one can remain sharp. But everything else we're going to soften. And then especially as we recess into here, we've got that really nice dark values. Again, being careful of my edges, and then I'm just going to soften this out from this side because I'm not going to have any sharp edges in our reflections. And see how that just automatically sets that right into and recesses that fabric right in there. Shows that it's all tucked really nicely into each other. Right, so this is going to come right across in here. Cuts it off like that. Okay. There we go. Now I do want to just double check. Let me just reestablish this edge in here. I just want to make sure that I'm not losing because this fabric in here is a straight edge and this is a straighter edge. It's casting a pretty straight edge in there, and I just want to reestablish this, just sharpen that up slightly, and then here it starts to dip. Okay, cool. Don't want to have any of those edges where this darker value meets with this green value, so I'm just going to blend it in there a little bit. Make it a real nice, soft, gentle transition. Okay, cool. I like that. All right, so let's move on to our second piece of this blue fabric. This blue fabric is also found down along the bottom, so bear with me. I hope I don't give anybody vertigo while I transition my camera here. And I'm actually probably just going to move my reference image. Let's move it out of the way. Just cinch it up right over there so we can see this blue area. All right, everybody see that? Give me a thumbs up if you can see it. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing. We've got this blue in this same area. There's a lot less shadow than what we have in this other area. We have, we had the cast shadows and everything else like that happening up at the top here. And so we want to make sure that we're, my light is coming in through, it's evening, the sun is like setting in my living room here. Sorry, it's casting some interesting shadows. Just want to make sure that I soften that up just a touch. Okay. in this area down in here. Okay, so I'm gonna go in and do the exact same thing. I'm going to grab this shadow value in here and establish my shadow. Now this transitions fairly quickly into dark shadow because it is really flat, so that it catches the light. We do have some more, like you can see the wrinkles that are happening in this fabric, and then it transitions very quickly into the shadow. But again, we're always thinking about light and shadow. What is the shadows doing? What are the lights doing? I'm so sorry about the light if it's blinding here through this. Okay, double check my drawing. What do my lines mean? So this is, I'm actually just going to go in and establish my cast shadow because there's a very, very dark cast shadow here, and I want to make sure that I keep the line. I spilt over some of this fabric into my tabletop, and I want to make sure that I'm reestablishing where the actual cast shadow on the table happens. So I'm just going to grab that darkest blue. It's going to be quite black in the final version, but I just want to make sure that I'm establishing this shape. And I'm going to be doing a couple of different styles of painting for each of this fabric. Some of this fabric over here is very detailed. You see I've got all those patterns in there. So I'm going to be handling it in a much more direct painting approach. Whereas this, I've already done it a couple of layers. I'm kind of blending it together as I go, painting it up in different layers, I'm going to allow this to dry, and then I'll come in with the lighter values and reestablish some things in there. So I'm just figuring out what each area needs and what's going to get me the best result. At the end of the day, I just want a good result. Nobody's going to come back and ask me how I did this, although you'll be able to see all the documentation, I suppose, on the internet, but it's really only academics that ask the masters how they did what they did. Other people just go and enjoy what they did, right? They just go and enjoy the artwork. All right. So there we go. Now this is quite blue. In the end, it's probably going to be quite black. I'll probably add a little bit of purple to it. That's what I've added to a lot of my shadows. Ultramarine blue and purple lake has been a lot of my shadows, with a little touch of that green in some of these areas. But those are kind of my shadow, and that's a way to unify my shadows. So if I add the same colors to darken all of my shadows, it's going to help unify the shadows in the painting and bring it closer together. Okay, let's move up to this and establish this area. I want to be thinking about form. So I do have a wrinkle that does have a little bit of shadow in here, so I just want to make sure that I am getting that into place at this stage. And I'm still thinking in terms of light and shadow. Following my transfer lines. I have them there for a reason, so we're going to use them. No point in spending all that time putting them in if we're not going to use them. This dips quite a bit lower here. There's quite a bit of light that kind of comes into this area here, so I'm just going to leave this a little bit lower and allow that transition color to really fill in that area there. And then it starts to come back up here. We're making good time. We're not doing too bad. How's everyone holding up? We doing okay? All right. So now I'm going to go in and I'm going to create that transition. So these were my two shadow values. Now I'm going to use my transition color, which is this medium color over here on my palette. And then we're going to roll it right quickly, fairly quickly into light. As I'm doing this, I'm thinking about where I have any wrinkles, where I see any of the form that's taking place. Now, when painting fabric, it's important to know that you don't need to include every single little crease that you see. You might drive yourself absolutely bonkers. Instead, think about where do we have light transitioning from light into shadow. That's going to create form. That's really important to have and explain where that happens in your reference. From there, just pick out the biggest shape. So if you stand back and you squint your eyes, where do you actually see those shapes happening? I see a big one happening in here. When I squint my eyes, I've got a little bit of one happening in here, and then another one right in here. And that's probably it. I do have one slightly over here, but to be honest, it's barely perceptible, so I'm not going to include it in. I'm trying to think in terms of big shapes, thinking in terms of form, light and shadow. Okay, so this comes up in here. I'm not dealing with my edges just quite yet. I will get there. This color in here kind of moves up into here because we've got a little bit of shadow that happens over here as the light rolls and creates a little bit of a shadow with that form. Again, following my transfer lines, where do I see that flow? It tells me about the rigid nature or the rippled nature of this fabric as it's curling underneath on the table here. So I don't want to lose that while I'm painting. I don't want to end up being just a straight line. That's going to lose the illusion of texture if it ends up being a really straight line. So again, always referencing back to my transfer, or always referencing back to my reference, figuring out what is this shape doing, what are we doing, what kind of edges are necessary in this area. This actually transitioned pretty quickly. There we go. So now I've just wiped off all the paint off of my brush, and I'm just going to go in and soften these edges just a little bit. There's quite a bit of paint on here, so it's not going to take much to soften this. And again, we don't want it to be porcelain. We don't want it to be super soft. We do want a little bit of modulation in there because it tells us something about the texture of that fabric in that area. Okay. Cool. So now I'm thinking about now again, I don't want to put in my brightest highlights, which my highlight's going to happen in here. I do just want to get in some of the light values, although we do have, going to mix more of that transition between, again, I know that there's a big jump between these two values, and I want to mix more of that admixture in between because it's going to be really important for this area. Place that right in between here and see where that stacks up. I feel like that's better. It's a good in between transition. Okay, so this comes up in here. Now with something like this painting, because I have all these different fabrics that have lots of different texture, it could be very easy to overwhelm. And what I mean by that is when a viewer is watching or is taking in the painting, if I showed every single hair and slight bump in the fabric, if I did the same over here, I've got all this wood grain that's happening on the tabletop. I've got all these patterned fabrics. It could be incredibly overwhelming. And so I want to have areas where a viewer's eye is able to go and rest. And these more simplistic fabrics are a great space for that to happen. So I want to make sure that I'm not unintentionally getting too bogged down in details in some of these areas where I'm intentionally making sure I have spaces in the composition where a viewer's eye can go and rest. The background is going to be like that. The background is very simplistic. It will be a slightly lighter gradient happening on this side over here. But I want to keep the background very, very simple because there is a lot of complexity happening in each of the different fabrics. I want to make sure to not include too much of that everywhere. We want to be selective about where we have that because we do know that in this piece, I do have it in quite a few areas. So that's got me thinking about, okay, well, in this area over here, do I really want to show all of the different slight wrinkles that are happening here, or do we want this just to be a calm area? This one and this one to be a little bit more calm because we're going to have so much of the texture that's happening in this area. We got to think about the viewer's experience as well too. Don't want the painting to come across as too busy. So you can see now that I've created that admixture, we're breaking down that edge quite a bit faster. So sometimes that's all it takes. It's a bit of an admixture to, if you can't bridge or get your gradient to be soft enough, your transition to be soft enough, just create an admixture. Almost done here. Now I want to slow down in this area and really pay attention as to what is happening. I've got a bit of a brighter hit of light that dips in like that. And then this edge is soft. As you're learning, it can be difficult to say, well, when does this need to be a sharp edge? When does this need to be a soft edge? If you don't know right at the onset, take a look at your reference, right? What is your reference saying? That's where I started when I first was trying to create more realistic portraits. I was really, really struggling. And I came across this video on YouTube talking about edges, and it simply talked through where you see a soft edge and where you see a sharp edge, right? So here is a soft edge and a sharp edge. And that little piece of information, I was able to go back to my references and see, oh, well, I can see where some of these edges are sharp. I can see where some of these edges are soft. Even without understanding the physics behind it or the science behind it, I was still able to level up my work. So if you're watching this and you're like, what is she talking about? Go right back to the very simple thing. If you can see a soft edge and the difference between that and a sharp edge, paint what you see. Paint what you see until you better understand what it is that you're seeing. All right, so just knocking that back a bit. That's looking good to me. This value, again, I want to bring it up over here, and it kind of comes across like this. Now there is a slight hit of a lighter edge just on here, just where this has been sewn together. But again, I'm going to leave that until I put in all the rest of my highlights. So we're just going to move up to this one here. Now, part of the great thing about creating or painting in layers is the fact that if I want to, let me just show you what I'm talking about. If I wanted to, because I already have paint down here in this, this first layer, if I wanted to scrub some of this back just a little bit, notice how I can create some darker areas and some lighter areas based on the thinness or the thickness of the paint. Because I have, everything is covered, right? I've got a layer of paint on absolutely everything. I can play around with the density of the paint to create some interesting shapes as well. Don't always necessarily have to rely on color alone. I can also play around with the density because I have an underpainting, because I have something underneath there. And that's going to change the value slightly. It's going to darken it because this is darker. The more transparent paint is going to appear darker. Anywhere where I want to create the illusion of a hit of light, I could just simply see if I just go in like this and I just make this area here more opaque. Even though this is the exact same color, notice how that looks like a highlight. And so you can play around with the density of the paint, and that's one of the beautiful things about painting in layers, is the fact that you have those options. And if you don't know it yet, if you haven't watched enough of my lives, you'll see that I just love options. I like getting to be able to make as many decisions as I can while I paint to get the result that I can. It leaves me with, one, a greater sense of control, but also the ability to change and alter things on the fly as I paint to make it better. And at the end of the day, we're all looking for a result, right? We're all looking for the painting to look like the subject or the object that we want it to look like. Okay, what am I doing here? We're gonna... Yeah, so this is a highlight. Paint this in. I want to make sure that this bumps up right against this area in here, because this fabric is sewn. This is actually a picnic blanket that I sewed together from a lot of the different fabrics from my grandmother's fabric stash. And so I want to make sure that I'm representing what I'm seeing, the fact that these two edges are sewn together quite tightly. All right, so let's block this in. And again, we can do it quite thin and then build up any area that we need to as it makes sense to make it appear brighter. But again, also keeping in mind that I don't want to have too much information happening in this area. I want to keep it fairly basic, because this is one of those areas where the eye is going to go to rest. I want to stress my viewers out. I want them to feel something when they take a look at this painting, but it not to be stress or anxiety, because there's just too much going on. So I'm just kind of moving my brush back and forth, scrubbing a little bit, making sure that I'm getting nice soft transitions. It allows there to be some variation in this area. Based on the density of the paint, some areas are a little bit thicker than others, some are a bit thinner. It's giving the illusion of texture, but you would only be able to see it if you were right up close to the nose to the canvas. And most people, again, because this is quite a 3 foot by 2 foot by 3 foot painting, it's quite large. Nobody's going to be looking at it like this, like I am. They're going to be taking a look at it from a couple steps back. Making sure at this stage that all of my transfer lines are going to be covered. I don't want any of my transfer to be showing through. All right, so just want to make sure that I'm stepping back. Oop, not knocking my camera over. Let's take a step back and see what it looks like. Oop. Okay, so I'm just gonna build some of this up just a little bit thicker so it appears lighter. Some of these areas. Not everywhere. I do like the way that this variation is giving it the appearance of some texture, but you can't see it far away, so it's still going to give the viewers that illusion of a safe place to land. Go. Okay. We're doing it, we're very close. Okay, and then this is definitely too dark in value, so I'm just gonna actually kind of blend this in a little bit just to make this less noticeable. I was talking about it yesterday, and I fall subject to this, so don't feel bad if this is something that you experience as well too. It's just that when I'm trying to create something like this where we've got form, or we've got light transitioning into shadow, and I do need to definitely resolve my edges there. But sometimes in an attempt to make it more noticeable, we end up pushing that value range just a little bit further than it actually should be, because we're like, well, we see this wrinkle here and we want to make sure that it's really noticeable. And you can see that I did the same thing with this one here too. Up the top, I had it way too dark to start, and I had to actually pull back the values and compress the values so that it wasn't as noticeable. And in doing that, it set it into reality and set it into its context. It's very, very easy to, when thinking about things like detail, and that's the trap, is that when you're thinking about a wrinkle rather than value and color, it's really tempting to increase that value range, make it much more noticeable, and then it starts to take it out of realism. So restraint is the key. Restrain is the key. Okay, I need to actually establish some form here though. So I just have sharp edges everywhere. So what's happening is basically the light is transitioning over this little wrinkle. It's transitioning from light into shadow really quickly on the other side here, and then it's creating a slight cast shadow. So that means that this edge along here is going to be sharper. It's not going to be super sharp, but it's going to be sharper. So there we go. We're just going to do it like that. But now what I need to do is I need to create a gradient, a small gradient in here where we just have this roll its form just slightly. Again, it's not going to be a perfectly smooth gradient because of the nature of this fabric. I did not even finish this gradient over to this edge. Oh my goodness. There's a little bit of an indent. Again, we don't want to get too crazy with it. We just want it to be super duper subtle, because if we get too crazy with it, then all of a sudden we're creating things that aren't there, creating more contrast than what is necessary, and it starts to look a bit garish. If you ever feel like your paintings look a bit garish, you've probably pushed your value range too far. Rein that value range back in, lighten up some of those areas, and bring back that value range into control. All right, so I'm just gonna soften this out here. All right, now I'm gonna go in from this side, and we start to get a little bit sharper. So again, just reestablish this sharper edge in there. And then the other thing that's going to help here is to create, again, I want to take this down. I think that value is way too dark. And then we're going to have a little pop of light. Now I'm not going any lighter than this light value that I have on here, but you'll see because some of this other area is a little bit transparent, it appears slightly darker. So if I just build up this paint a little bit on this side, it's going to create the illusion of a highlight. And it's just because this wrinkle is facing the light, right? We've got the light coming in from this area. This plane of that little wrinkle is catching that light in its most direct way, so that's why it's got its highlight on that side. So you see, if we just establish that, you start to see that wrinkle start to pop right out. Now this lighter value comes slightly out like this. And I want to sink this into its context, so I'm just going to soften this edge. And there we go. You can see that that looks like we've got that wrinkle in fabric that's just pulling out just slightly. Now I don't want to do anything more with that. I'm just going to actually add just slightly more paint up to this ridge just to create that highlight. I'll go in with some lighter value as well too when I pull together all the rest of the, I know this isn't quite the final, it's still slightly darker than what I'm seeing in terms of the final value. And so we can push it lighter if we need to, but just establishing some highlights in some areas. And see, you can see here, you can see it on the screen, even just slightly, just that addition of paint created a little bit of a highlight and showed that this is just very slightly popping out, right? Where these two fabrics have been sewn together, there's this tiny little amount of a seam, but then it pops out and there's just a little shelf that the light can catch. All right. So I think that's pretty happy with that, the way that that's looking. Just want to make sure I'm not creating, again, sharp edges. We don't want to have sharp edges in this fabric. This is quite a terry cloth fabric, and so we want to make sure that we're representing that with our edge work. So there you go, painting fabric. We've done two different areas. Let me just, the light is catching that other area, very funny. You can see this area up in here, the work that we've done in there, as well as on this other area down here at the bottom. We're not painting fabric, we're actually painting light and shadow, and how you can use value and edges to create 3D impact, and the illusion of texture is what we're looking for. So hopefully this was helpful for you. Hopefully you gained some information. If you did, please give this a thumbs up or subscribe. And I'm looking forward to continuing this painting live. I will paint this from start to finish, absolutely all of it live here on this channel. And I hope to catch you in the next one. All right, thanks everybody who joined today. Appreciate you. Take care, bye-bye.